willingness to give up different types of data? Is some of it innocuous, or do you draw some line in the sand with that sort of thing as well?
Well, actually, the Face app craze of the last week is interesting because people found it creepy somehow. They were worried that it's a Russian company. And I think this is very central to what's going on with tech, that unlike other industries that might be facing antitrust pressure from time to time, with tech, everybody has personally had this experience of realizing that the companies are doing something with data, that there's something tricky going on, that things are being customized in order to manipulate you, and you don't get to see it. There's some kind of a lack of transparency. And when each person can feel that directly, I think it adds to the political pressure. It adds to this feeling that there's something off here. And I think that that is inevitably going to have an effect on the industry.
Okay, so is it overall a good thing, or is it a neutral thing? These fines that we're seeing, whether it's Equifax, FTC, Google, Facebook, is it going to change behavior one way or the other, you think?
I haven't seen any evidence that it's changing behavior. I think what changes behavior is incentives created by markets and business plans, not by government fines. You know, because once you've gotten the fine, it's not like you're going to get another fine immediately. It's a kind of a known cost that has a limit and is kind of exceptional. So it doesn't really change your fundamental incentive structure. What we really need is incentives that are aligned with the interests of people and society, customers, everybody. And right now, the incentives are not aligned with the interests of everybody. The incentives are kind of weird. In fact, sometimes it's not even clear who ultimately benefits. When you have kind of tricky and I'd call them occult algorithms because you can't see them. Nobody knows what's going on. There's no transparency. It just makes everybody feel on edge and lose trust in the technology and even in the society as a whole. It creates a kind of a cynicism. And so we have to change the business incentives. I really don't think government fines can do that. Maybe they can a little bit, but when the fundamental incentives of the business are going in a different direction, a fine here or there is not going to really have much impact on what happens.
So, Jaron, when I think about incentives, I think about shareholders, and you know, you're not very disheartened if you're worried about privacy. Look at Facebook, up more than 50% year to date. Give me an example. How do you get those incentives more aligned in terms of privacy and what the business is doing, particularly when you see these big tech companies, their stock prices surging amidst all of the scrutiny and all the fines?
Right. Well, it's a little different for each company. In the case of Facebook, I really believe it has to turn into a business that's more similar to Netflix, where people pay to use it. And I also believe that people need to be paid when their data is used. Because if people are paid for their data, that undoes the incentive to misuse the data. It also does something really interesting. Since AI is driven by data, if people are paid for their data, they can make they can make their money in a new way as there's more and more AI and more robots. So instead of AI turning into no employment, it can turn into total employment eventually. So I think paying people for data and people paying for services, that's how to fix Facebook. And then I think Facebook would become wonderful. I really do.
Jaron.
Yeah.
Sorry, just with the idea of paying for data, we spoke to Mark Cuban the other week and said that would actually be very dangerous, because then it might actually incentivize these companies to hoard the data to themselves and do things for it because they've simply paid for it. So, you know, are you worried about that if you talk about such a solution?
Yeah, the way you're paid has to be on a royalty basis, so hoarding would be very expensive. It can't be a one-time thing. It has to be, you have to own your data in a permanent sense and only get royalties when it's used. So the idea of somebody else hoarding your data would not make sense and would be very expensive. That's the only way to do it. You have to have what the Europeans would call a moral right to your own data. And so if you had a system where somebody could buy your data permanently, then he would be absolutely correct. But that's not the way to do it. That would be exactly the wrong way to do it. And by the way, I can tell you about 100 other terrible ways to do it, but there are good ways to do it.
No, this is not a hackathon, Jaron. Hey, of the large companies, Which do you think would be most likely to go to a pay-for-use kind of model? Because it's hard to imagine any of these companies at this point of the game switching so dramatically.
Well, you know, the pioneer has really been Netflix. And I know Netflix hasn't had the easiest time in just the last little period, but overall, they've proven you can build a business charging for something that people technically could get for free if they wanted to go to the trouble. And I think what we should do is look at Netflix successes and build on them. That's a concrete example. Now, as far as people getting paid for their data, there are fewer examples, but they exist. I'll tell you what my personal favorite is right now. I've been interested in the literally tens of millions and maybe hundreds of millions of people in the developing world who make their living over Skype by doing services, music lessons, advice, yoga lessons, that kind of stuff. And you know, people who have a chance to be their own free agents on the internet can find a way to make a living, provided we give them that chance. And that really grows the economy. It develops the world. It's good for everybody.